Have you ever wondered what happens to individuals who are given the ultimate penalty by the U.S. military? Stay tuned as we present the full list and share the surprising details behind these high-stakes decisions. Andrew Paul Wit was born in 1981 in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Quiet, reserved, and mostly under the radar, he joined the U.S. Air Force in late 2001 and was stationed at Robins Air Force Base in Georgia. By all accounts, he kept a low profile until one night changed everything. On July 5, 2004, Senior Airman Andrew Schleipzig and his wife Jamie were found brutally harmed in their on-base home. It began the day before, during a 4th of July cookout. Wit allegedly made an inappropriate move toward Jamie. When Andrew found out, he confronted him and made it clear the incident would be reported. He also threatened to expose Wit's rumored affair with an officer's wife. That warning pushed Wit over the edge. Later that night, Wit came back, this time in uniform, likely so he wouldn't raise any red flags on base. It was dark, and he made his way toward the Schleipzig's home. Inside was a visitor, Senior Airman Jason King. He was the first person Wit encountered. King tried to get away and barely made it out alive. Wit then entered the home and seriously harmed both Andrew and Jamie Schleipzig. The aftermath was devastating. Once the incident came to light, the military immediately stepped in. Wit was charged with 2 counts of premeditated fatal action and 1 count of attempted premeditated fatal action. The charges were based on evidence from the Air Force's investigation. During the trial, Wit's defense admitted that he caused harm to the victims but argued that it wasn't planned. He also spoke to the court and expressed deep regret. He said, "To the families, to the Schleipzigs and Bielenbergs, I am so sorry from the bottom of my being." The military jury didn't accept this argument. After deliberations, Wit was found guilty on all charges. On October 13, 2005, Wit was sentenced to capital punishment by a military panel. This was also the first capital punishment case in the Air Force since 1990. The jury's decision was influenced by the brutal nature of the incident and the impact on the victims' families. Jamie Schleipzig's father, Jim Bielenberg, expressed his grief, remembering his daughter as a little girl who would never come back. Wit's legal team filed several appeals, challenging his conviction and sentence. In August 2013, the Air Force Court of Criminal Appeals overturned his capital punishment, stating that there were problems with his trial defense. However, his convictions remained. In 2016, his capital punishment was reinstated, but Wit continued to challenge it. In 2018, a new sentencing hearing took place, and a panel recommended life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This recommendation was accepted by higher courts, and Wit was officially resentenced in 2021. As of April 10, 2025, Andrew Wit is serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole at the United States Penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. But what happens when quiet resentment behind the uniform builds up until it finally breaks, costing a dozen lives? On November 5, 2009, a tragic event took place at Fort Hood, Texas, that would change many lives forever. The incident resulted in 13 people losing their lives and left 32 others injured. But before we move on to the details, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. Nidal Malik Hassan was born on September 8, 1970, in Arlington County, Virginia. He was the son of Palestinian immigrants and grew up in a religious Muslim household. Hassan faced the challenge of balancing the cultural expectations of his family with his life in America. Despite this, he pursued higher education, earning a bachelor's degree from Virginia Tech and later a medical degree from the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. After finishing his medical training, Nidal Hassan became a commissioned officer in the U.S. Army, working as a psychiatrist. but something felt off. Colleagues described him as withdrawn, distant. He seemed overwhelmed by the trauma stories of returning soldiers and increasingly vocal about his own discomfort with U.S. military actions in the Middle East. Some reported that he made unsettling comments, suggesting that Muslims should resist serving in the American military. In the months before everything unraveled, Hassan's behavior grew more alarming. He began exchanging emails with Anwar al-Awlaki, a radical cleric based in Yemen known for encouraging wrongful behavior. Authorities reviewed the messages, but, at the time, believed they were part of legitimate research. No immediate threat was flagged. On November 5, 2009, just weeks before he was set to deploy to Afghanistan, Major Malik Hassan walked into the Soldier Readiness Center at Fort Hood. Armed with 2 handguns, he opened fire. Witnesses say he shouted a phrase in Arabic as the shooting began. The chaos lasted about 10 minutes before military police intervened. Hassan was shot and survived, but was left paralyzed from the waist down. In the aftermath, investigators uncovered troubling details. He had been in contact with known extremists and showed signs of growing radical beliefs. Still, he wasn't charged with terrorism. Instead, he faced 13 counts of premeditated manslaughter and 32 counts of attempted premeditated harm, marking one of the most horrific acts ever carried out on a U.S. military base. During his court-martial in 2013, Hassan chose to represent himself. He showed little remorse throughout the proceedings. When it was time for him to make his final statements, he ended with just 3 words: "The defense rests." The military jury found him guilty on all charges and recommended the maximum punishment. On August 28, 2013, Hassan was sentenced to the highest penalty possible. He was also dismissed from the Army and stripped of all his military pay and benefits. This was the first time since 1961 that an active-duty U.S. soldier was sentenced to such a penalty. As of April 2025, Hassan is still incarcerated at the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. His appeals have been denied, with the U.S. Supreme Court rejecting his final petition in March 2025. But trust me, the next case will leave you questioning everything. Born in 1968 in Rochester, New York, Louis Jones Loving Jr. had a troubled start in life. Enlisting in the Army seemed like a way out, maybe a search for structure or simply an escape. By December 1988, he was 20 years old, stationed at Fort Hood as a private first class. On the surface, he followed orders, but underneath, something far darker was taking shape. On the night of December 11, 1988, that darkness took over. It began with 2 armed thefts at local convenience stores. The haul? Less than $100. Around 8 p.m., Loving called a cab. The driver was Private Christopher Fay, a fellow soldier moonlighting to earn extra money. Loving had him drive to a secluded area on base. There, he pulled a gun, took Fay's cash, and shot him twice in the back of the head. Later, he chillingly described watching Fay's blood gushing out. Minutes later, he was back in his barracks, calm, composed. Then, at 8:15 p.m., he called another cab. This time, 44-year-old retired Army Sergeant Bobby Charbonneau answered. Loving directed him to a quiet street in nearby Killeen, Texas, then eliminated him the same way. Charbonneau's body was discovered not long after. Still not done, Loving targeted a third cab driver later that night, 28-year-old Howard Harrison. But this time, things didn't go as planned. Harrison fought back. Loving fled on foot, disappearing into the night. The next day, a combined team of FBI agents, Texas Rangers, and the U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Division launched a manhunt for Loving. He was eventually captured by Army special agents, who obtained a videotaped confession. In the confession, Loving chillingly stated that he unalived Faye to see if he could get away with it and eliminated Charbino for fun. So, what was his motive? Dwight Jeffrey Loving was driven by a desire for money, the intent to avoid being identified, and a disturbing interest in seeing if he could get away with taking lives. Loving's court-martial began at Fort Hood in March 1989. On April 3, 1989, he was convicted of premeditated charges for the eliminations of Faye and Charbino, attempted harm to Harrison, and several counts of armed theft. The jury sentenced him to capital punishment. In 1996, the Supreme Court ruled that military capital punishments were constitutional, including Loving's. But no such military punishment can happen without a president's approval, and none was given. Years later, in 2017, President Obama commuted Loving's sentence to life without parole, citing the long gap in military executions and changing views on capital punishment. As of April 2025, Loving remains in custody at the U.S. Disciplinary Barracks in Kansas. Born Mark Fidel Cools in April 1971, Hassan Kharim Akbar changed his name after converting to Islam. He was raised in a military family and later joined the U.S. Army, serving with the 101st Airborne Division. Reports show that Akbar struggled with issues of disobedience and signs of mental distress, such as paranoia and insomnia. March 23, 2003, just before dawn at Camp Pennsylvania in Kuwait. The base was calm until the lights cut out. Sergeant Hassan Akbar had sabotaged the generator. In the pitch black, he tossed grenades into tents where soldiers were sleeping, then opened fire with his rifle. Army Captain Christopher Seifert was hit while trying to escape. Air Force Major Gregory Stone was caught in the blast. 14 others were badly wounded as panic swept through the camp. At first, no one knew why. Was it a breakdown or something planned? Investigators soon found Akbar's personal journal. In an entry dated weeks before, he wrote about his growing anger and a desire to strike back. He felt targeted, isolated, and pushed past his breaking point. In April 2005, Akbar's court-martial began. The defense argued that his mental instability, including paranoia and sleep disorders, impacted his judgment. However, the jury found him guilty of premeditated acts against his fellow soldiers. During the sentencing phase of his trial, Akbar made a brief statement to the jury. "I want to apologize for the attack that occurred. I felt that my life was in jeopardy and I had no other options. I also want to ask you for forgiveness." On April 21, 2005, he was sentenced to capital punishment, making it the first time a soldier received this sentence since the Vietnam War. Military ultimate penalty sentences must be approved by the president. Akbar's case went through several appeals, challenging various legal issues. By October 3, 2016, all appeals had been exhausted. As of April 2025, Akbar remains at the United States Disciplinary Barracks in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, awaiting further action. But what if a painful past becomes the trigger for something so unthinkable? Timothy Hennis was born in 1958 in Rochester, Minnesota. After graduating high school, he decided on a different path than his father, who worked for IBM. In 1980, Hennis joined the U.S. Army. By 1985, he was stationed at Fort Bragg, working as a parachute rigger. That same year, he and his wife welcomed a baby daughter. In May of that year, across town, Katie Eastburn was preparing for a big move. Her husband was being transferred to England, and with the move approaching, she placed an ad to rehome the family's dog, Dixie. Timothy Hennis responded to that ad. He went to the Eastburn home to adopt the dog. Just days later, neighbors noticed something strange. No movement, no sounds coming from the house. Concerned, they called the police. What officers found inside was horrifying. Katie Eastburn and her 2 young daughters were lifeless. Only the youngest child, Jana, survived, barely, dehydrated and alone. The scene pointed to a single intruder. Fingerprints, hair, and eyewitness accounts all seemed to lead in one direction. Timothy Hennis. He had the dog. He matched the description of a man seen near the house. In 1986, Hennis was put on trial for the Eastburn family case. The prosecution presented evidence, including eyewitness testimonies and a timeline that placed Hennis at the scene. Despite his claims of innocence, he was convicted on 3 counts of premeditated harm and sentenced to capital punishment. He was held at North Carolina's Central Prison. Timothy Hennis's motive was never clearly proven in court, and that's one of the reasons this case remains so debated. There was no strong evidence showing a personal connection between him and Katie Eastburn beyond the visit to adopt the family's dog. Prosecutors believed the motive may have involved a personal encounter that turned into a horrific act. In 1988, the North Carolina Supreme Court overturned Hennis's conviction, stating that the jury had been unduly influenced by graphic scene photos. A retrial was held in 1989, and Hennis was acquitted due to a lack of direct evidence linking him to the incident. He was released from prison and re-enlisted in the U.S. Army. He eventually retired as a staff sergeant in 2004. In 2006, advances in DNA technology led to the reopening of the case. DNA from the incident scene was retested, and the results matched Hennis. However, due to previous issues with handling evidence, some people question the reliability of the findings. Although the Fifth Amendment protects against being tried twice for the same incident, the U.S. Army used a legal principle called dual sovereignty to court-martial Hennis. In 2010, after a trial at Fort Bragg, Hennis was convicted on 3 counts of premeditated harm and sentenced to capital punishment. He was demoted to the rank of Private E1, dishonorably discharged, and transferred to the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Hennis remains incarcerated at Fort Leavenworth, awaiting further developments in his case. Ronald Adrian Gray's name is closely tied to a series of disturbing actions that occurred while he was serving in the U.S. Army. He was born on August 14, 1965, in Cochran, Georgia, and his early life was filled with struggles and hardships. Raised in Liberty City, a public housing area in Miami, Gray faced many challenges growing up. At 18, seeking a sense of purpose, Gray enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1984. He was assigned to the Target Acquisition Battery, 139 Field Artillery Battalion, and later served as a cook with the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. During his court-martial, his mother and sister testified about the mistreatment he suffered at the hands of his stepfather when he was a child. Between April 1986 and January 1987, Gray carried out a series of horrific acts, mostly targeting young women connected to the military community. His first known victim was 23-year-old Linda Jean Coates, a student at Campbell University. She was taken against her will, harmed, and unalived on April 27, 1986. Ray's other victims included 18-year-old Tammy Kofer Wilson. Her body was discovered with clear signs she had been severely mistreated. Around that same time, Private Laura Lee Vickery Clay, also 18, disappeared after being seen with a man matching Gray's description. Her remains were later found in a wooded area near Fort Bragg. Nearby, investigators recovered a stolen .22 caliber pistol, directly linked to Gray. Ronald Gray's actions were driven by a need for control and a deep emotional disturbance. He often targeted young women who were connected to the military community. His behavior showed signs of cruelty and a desire to dominate others. The turning point came when Private Mary Ann Langnamuth survived a harrowing encounter. Gray tricked his way into her barracks by pretending to be someone official. Once inside, he tried to overpower her, but she fought back and escaped. Her testimony would later prove vital in connecting Gray to the ongoing pattern. Then, in January 1987, 23-year-old Kimberly Ann Ruggles, a civilian cab driver, was found unalived near her abandoned taxi. Her body showed signs of serious harm, and investigators discovered Gray's fingerprints inside the vehicle. Cash found on Gray also matched money taken from Ruggles. Eyewitnesses placed him near multiple scenes, and the physical evidence left little doubt. Langnamuth's account helped solidify the case. Within days, Gray was arrested at Fort Bragg. Gray's legal battles took place in both civilian and military courts. In November 1987, he pled guilty to 22 felonies. He was sentenced to 8 life terms, 3 of which would be served consecutively. At the same time, a military court-martial was held at Fort Bragg. Survivors and experts provided evidence that painted a clear picture of Gray as a soldier who carried out these acts with chilling precision. In April 1988, he was convicted of 14 charges, including the premeditated harm of Private Vickery Clay and Kimberly Ruggles, as well as the attempted harm of Private Langnamuth. The panel unanimously sentenced him to capital punishment, also recommending a dishonorable discharge and demotion to the lowest rank. The commanding general of the 82nd Airborne Division approved the capital punishment in July 1988. At just 22 years old, Gray became the first service member to receive a capital punishment since 1961. In July 2008, President George W. Bush approved his capital punishment, marking the first time a president had approved a military sentence since 1957. The sentence was scheduled for December 10, 2008, at the Federal Correctional Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana. However, in the following years, his sentencing was delayed multiple times due to appeals and legal challenges. On November 26, 2008, a federal judge halted the planned process of carrying out his capital punishment. Later, on January 26, 2012, the Army Court of Criminal Appeals denied any relief in his case, and on November 13, 2017, the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces also denied an appeal. As of 2025, Gray remains in the U.S. Disciplinary Barracks in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, awaiting a final resolution to his case.